kind of working out, getting our logistics going. Because we're also the post unit, so we're also tending to all these other people. And it's like, holy cow, I'm supposed to be at the artillery battery right now. And so we're going to do a demonstration, 1812 field artillery demonstration. So what you see in front of you are soldiers of Cushing's Company, 2nd United States Artillery. Okay, this is the regular Army, United States Army uniform for artillerymen in the War of 1812. The infantrymen wear a very similar uniform. Basically, it's a blue coat at the beginning of the war with red collar and cuffs. Red collar and cuffs. The artillery had yellow tape on their coats and brass buttons. Infantry was identified with white tape on their coats and pewter buttons. And of course, the artillery has a sexy brass cap plate, whereas the artillery has a cheesy tin cap plate. So it's easy to tell the difference between the cool artillerymen and the so-so infantry guys. And I think we're all artillery today.
Why do you have a gold tassel on your hat?
Same thing. The cap cord here, it's called. A little tassel in the cord. This one's not a bit faded. But same thing, the infantry would be white, artillery is yellow. So you get the kind of theme. There's kind of a color theme here. A cannon at the time, well, there's 3 types of ordnance. You've got cannon, also known as guns. So nobody refers to a hand weapon as a gun. It's either a musket or a pistol or a rifle. Guns are what you see behind me on the left and the right. Those are field guns. So they are light guns, considered light guns. They're both made out of brass. They fire a cannonball that weighs 6 pounds. So they're called 6-pounders. If I had a cannon that fired a 12-pound ball, it would be called a
12-pounder.
Excellent. And those are 12-pounders down there on Big Battery if you wanted to see the difference in size. Now cannons, that's caliber of the gun. You can also have different size of guns depending on the length of the barrel. So you can have a 9-foot long 6-pounder, or you can have a short 4.5-foot long 6-pounder, or any size in between. And the difference, of course, is how much is the barrel going to weigh. We are land artillery, meaning that we must move everything by hand. And in this case here at Fort Meigs, we had to drag it through the Great Black Swamp, which was no fun at all. Okay, so we place high value on light, relatively light guns. Brass guns, the 2 6-pounders behind me, the longer barrels, they weigh in, the gun barrel weighs in about 500 pounds. Okay, so that's 500-600 pounds. That same caliber gun in iron is going to weigh about 900 pounds. So we like brass guns. Now, unfortunately, the people who have to pay for these, iron guns are way cheaper than brass guns. And so if you're in Washington, you will only issue iron guns. So we here at Fort Meigs, although we have some brass guns, whenever we fill out an ordnance return, we always tell Washington we have iron guns. We don't come and take these. We like these. Okay. So the whole contraption, the carriage itself, the wooden part, the big wheels, that is a field type carriage. It's meant to be operated out on an open field with slopes and holes and pits and all that other interesting stuff. And so the wheels make it much easier to move on an open field. We have it on a prepared battery platform here. Elsewhere in the fort, you're going to see guns on a different type of carriage. It's low and it has 4 little bitty wheels, which are perfect for a platform, but they are terrible over rough ground because it's such a small wheel, it's hard to move. So those are called garrison guns. I think we're about ready to go. Ready? Let's do a little intro. So I thought we were going to go to action. To action! Thank you very much. Okay, to action means that they're going to take the tools off the gun. I'm going to do a little go around here and let you know what everybody's going to do. We're going to start with the powder man while he's getting his thing here. So in the rear here, this is actually be 25 yards away from the gun, is person responsible for bringing the fixed ammunition up from the ready box, that little box there, and it would be a 6-pound cannonball attached to a 2-pound bag of black powder. And they would bring that forward in a haversack. There you go. See that leather bag? I want a leather bag because I don't want it burning through. I don't want a spark getting in the bag, for obvious reasons. Right? So you bring that forward in what's called a gunner's haversack. Now, in the right front corner, the number 1 matros, Mr. Redding, he is armed with a sponge rammer, it's called. On one end is a sheepskin pulled over a form. On the other end is a rammer head. Okay, the sheepskin is to clean the bore of the gun. The rammer head is to push the charge to the breech end of the gun. These are all muzzle loaders. You have to load through the muzzle. Opposite him is the number 2 matros, who has a worm. See that corkscrew thing? I'm going to use that because after we fire the piece, there will be the remains of the charge, the container that held the gunpowder, is going to be in the breech of the gun. We've got to clean that out of there. So that's what the worm's for. The number 2 matros is also responsible for actually loading the piece. So he will receive the gun, the fixed ammunition from the powder man and put it in the muzzle of the piece so that the number 1 man can ram it down. Now, just when you think you're figuring it out, okay, 1, 2, you figure number 3 is coming around counterclockwise, but that's not number 3. That is the gunner of the left. Okay, the gunner of the left has a slow match. Same thing that the 13th century Landsknecht guys were using, except in this case it's on a stick. That stick is called a lintstock, and that's how we're going to fire the piece. Opposite the gunner of the left is the gunner of the right. Gunner of the right is armed with a belly box which has priming quills and a priming wire. So his job is to charge. He will, once the charge is seated in the breech, he will prick a hole in it and put in a priming quill, and then when the gun is ready to fire, he will announce that the gun is ready to fire by yelling ready and raising his hand, because all of us are half deaf, so yelling doesn't work well with us. Are we ready to do this? All right, so I'm going to give the commands. I'm acting as the battery NCO today. So I'm going to give commands, and we'll kind of watch them do their thing. Spot! Stand back! Go. So first thing to do is to cover the vent in the back with your thumb, and then use the sponge to clean the bore of the gun. At the same time, the powder man comes up with a ready charge. Handle cartridge! Powder man hands the charge to the number 2 matros. Charge piece! Now today, just so we're not too worrisome, we're not going to fire any cannonballs. Ram cartridge! And we're only using about 10 ounces of black powder instead of 2 pounds. Mostly because it's cheaper. Okay, once the charge is seated properly, and they have to be happy. So one of the things, this is good to talk, because there's a lot of nonverbal communication going on between the members of the crew, right? So you don't proceed to the next step until everybody's satisfied with the previous thing. Prime! Okay, you notice the gunner on the left, his only job is to keep that match hot and to keep it away from the gun until we were ready to fire. Okay, he's working on his prime. There we go. Ready! Guns ready? Are you all ready? Now's when you want to think about covering your ears, especially children should cover their ears. Everybody's ready? Number 1, fire! Search please!
It felt like I was scared.
Okay, so there's a couple differences between what we're doing and what would have happened historically. As I said, big difference is that was 10 ounces, so figure 2/3 of a pound, not 2 pounds, okay? And we're not pushing a cannonball across the Maumee River here. Cannonball, 6-pound solid shot, effective range is going to be in the neighborhood of 500 to 700 yards, depending on conditions. So that's how far that 6-pound iron ball is going to go. Unlike the infantry that uses lead, cannons always use iron. That's because of the higher charge, you melt lead. So you need to use iron. So you get a nice, solid, heavy bullet, if you will.
Isn't Miami? The Brits were over there somewhere.
The
weren't
British
they?
were right across the river, that's right.
Somewhere over there.
And they would be at the extreme range of the 6-pounder. We'd have bigger guns here if we were shooting at the British batteries, because although we could probably hit those batteries, we couldn't do much damage to them from this range. So 6-pound is really meant to be an anti-personnel type weapon that accompanies an army in the field. Think in today's, anybody, soldiers here, veterans, right? Thank you, first off, thank you for your service. Think of a field artillery piece in the 1800s as the equivalent of a crew-served machine gun. That was its function on the battlefield. It was a heavy weapon, but it was not what modern artillery is, a long distance over the horizon, or lobbing shells at people that can't even see it. You still have to be in direct line of sight, and you're going to use solid shot for long-range shots, and at close-range shots, you're going to use case shot. Case shot is essentially a canister, also called canister shot, for those who heard that term, full of iron balls, marbles. There'd be 30 or 40 of them in a 6-pound case shot. Again, with that same 2-powder gun charge, except now instead of a solid bullet, I've got essentially a shotgun shell, pellets. Much shorter range, 300 to 400 yards, but it spreads out to maybe 30 or 40 yards wide, and it'll pretty much knock down anything in front of it, people-wise. Okay, so kind of the equivalent of a modern machine gun, if you want to think about it that way. Any questions for me at this point? Do it again? Okay.
In the heat of battle, what was the rate of fire from a seasoned professional crew?
So that's I always get that question, so thank you. There's no simple answer to that. One of the things that we're omitting here, remember I said I had a number 1 and a number 2 matros? I also have a 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 matros, and sometimes an 8, 9, and 10. And their job is to put the gun back where it started, because in an actual full service charge, the gun's going to recoil.
Right.
The 2 men in the front, they're the markers for where the gun was when it fired. They don't move, right? So the gun rolls behind them, and then these other matrosses, these other men, would use drag ropes and things to push the gun back to where it started. So you got to run the gun back, and then relay it to adjust your target. A good crew could probably do that around in a minute or around every 2 minutes, but they were discouraged from firing rapidly because they have a limited ready supply, about 20 rounds available to them, and it'd be really embarrassing to go through all your ammunition before things got really interesting. Yes, sir.
What's the service life of the barrel? How many rounds?
That is another excellent question, and it really depends. Once again, it really depends. The rate of fire figures into that, so if you're using it a lot. What happens is the barrel, not so much, but the vent widens. And you might get 1,000 rounds or so out of the gun. And of course, it's different for iron guns than it is for bronze guns, and it's different for different calibers. But essentially, you end up opening up that vent. What limits the service life is the whole of the vent. And as it gets bigger, you lose more of your propulsive gases out of the vent instead of pushing the cannonball up front. So then you have to re-drill and serve that. I said 1,000. I don't really know of a fixed number. It's so dependent on things. And it would never be in a period of time, because a lot of guns never got fired. They sat on ship decks or they sat in fortifications, and they maybe fired a couple rounds every once in a while just to kind of exercise the gun crew, but they never actually saw any action. But you might see Napoleon in Europe. I think he wanted 200 to 300 rounds for a campaign, so that's how many rounds he would plan on firing per gun in a summer, 200 to 300 times. I say we probably do that at least, but we'll find bank cartridges. You might see 1,000 rounds out of a barrel. they weren't as tightly monitored as modern artillery is. Let's go ahead and do this again. Sponge, defend! That's a good question. Now you got me thinking. I'm going to have to look that up. Handle cartridge! Get out of here. Camera. Charge, peace! Ram, cartridge! Run! Ready! Guns ready? Number one, fire! Search and secure the piece. Okay, so that concludes our firing demonstration. We're going to stick around as soon as the gun is clear. You're welcome to come up and look, talk to the crew. We'll be around here all weekend. And everybody, see you got your big schedules. There's some things going on in different places. And of course, any questions you have, we'll stick around and answer those. So enjoy the rest of your day.
So imagine